Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 477. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Got a good amount of news to get through on today's show. More updates on Haiti, updates on the defense spending bill, and then we'll get into the war in Ukraine. A lot of important stuff in today's show. Make sure you share the show. Host it at the Libertarian Institute. Repost it on the blog at antiwar.com. YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you could listen to audio podcasts. And then you could follow me on all my social media accounts where you can find the show and all the articles I write. On Twitter, that's Kyle Anzalone _. On Instagram, that's Kyle Anzalone 3. And then you just add me on Facebook. I'm Kyle Anzalone. You see a picture of me in my Libertarian Institute hoodie, which, by the way, we do have awesome swag at the Libertarian Institute. So if you want to rep the gear that Scott Horton and Keith Knight wear, then think about heading on over to the Institute and buying one of our hoodies or t-shirts, or we got a bunch of other great stuff like mugs and everything. All right, first up here on today's show, Senator Menendez refuses to resign and slams the indictment against him as salacious. So Senator Robert Menendez has denied the allegations levied against him by the Department of Justice. Last week, a grand jury indicted the powerful senator on bribery charges. Investigators found hundreds of thousands of dollars said to be payments to access the senator's influence. And on the last show, when I kind of broke it down, I already had a lot of information about the accusations, so I didn't get too much into the evidence. But they do have Menendez on calls with one of the co-defendants, Will Hanna, immediately before doing things that benefited the Egyptian government. So they're pretty sure that, Hanna is asking Menendez for sensitive information about U.S. Government employees of the Cairo embassy, the U.S. embassy in Egypt, and that he's asking for these letters. And they also have, I believe, all three defendants, but certainly Hanna and Fred Diabas, they have their fingerprints on some of the envelopes and other items used to transfer, or on the money in the items themselves, the bribes themselves. So while Menendez here is going to claim a whole bunch of reasons why he is actually being prosecuted, the evidence against him does look pretty solid at this point. So Menendez, along with his wife, are accused of taking bribes to benefit three local businessmen and the Egyptian government. The indictment explains that the senator used his position as head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to ensure Cairo received billions in military aid from Washington and approvals to purchase weapons from American arms manufacturers. Through Will Hanna, Menendez is alleged to have passed a sensitive list of names to the Egyptian government. Additionally, he is charged with attempts to rig the justice system to benefit Wani Uribe and Fred Diabas. And again, I haven't gotten into those two charges quite as much because I feel like it's a little bit more different from what we usually cover on the show, although it is, very serious that we basically now have businessmen in America who pay tens of thousands of dollars, or not like a prohibited amount of money, but if you have access to a senator, you probably got to donate to their campaign somewhat regularly, make those connections to begin with. But once you have them, if you could, slip $10,000, $20,000 to a senator and have that senator actively work to undermine the prosecution against you, that's a very powerful ally to have. If you look at Diabas, he's actually been able to postpone his sentencing 4 times, and during that time, he signed a $45 million agreement with the Qatari government, a real estate deal. So these men are certainly profiting off of Menendez and his access to power and influence. So on Monday, Menendez denied the allegations. He said, "The allegations levied against me are just that, allegations. I recognize that this will be the biggest fight yet. Not only will I be exonerated, I will still be a New Jersey senator." In a letter sent to Democrats responding to calls against him to resign, Menendez said he was targeted because of his race. He said, "It's not lost on me how quickly some are rushing to judge a Latino and punish him out of his seat." And so this is just wild and ridiculous. I really hate this kind of stuff because people will gravitate to it and say, oh, that is the reason he's being prosecuted. But again, you look at the evidence and what he's done. He's a terrible person. So investigators say they located over $500,000 in bribe money that the Menendez home and in a safety deposit belonging to his wife. And this is just a portion of the funds. This is kind of the liquid assets that we've been able to see, but there's also allegations that they received luxury cars. His wife had a job that she didn't have to show up to work for. I think it was Uribe it was Hannah who just paid her. Whatever. I have no idea what that salary was, of 50, 100 grand or something like that. That she just got that. As a way to push the bribe money. So the number is likely higher than what they've, found so far. And once we get to trial, they'll probably kind of lay out what the cars are and the values of them and things like that. So as Menendez says here, this may seem old fashioned, but these were monies drawn from my personal savings account based on the income that I have lawfully derived over these 30 years. Adding that prosecutors had framed the indictment to be as salacious as possible. And look, I do understand, especially as a libertarian, why people would be interested in holding on to large amounts of cash. And so it's not just the cash alone. Again, it's all the other links, the actions that Menendez did or did not take in the Senate, the actions related to the assistant prosecutors that were looking at these cases. And then additionally, you had the timing of the calls between Menendez and Hannah, and the bribe envelopes and things like that have the co-defendant's fingerprints on it. So it's not just that they found the cash in his house and are like, oh, well, this Latino's up to no good who has $400,000 sitting around, which is what Menendez would like you to believe. But there's a lot more evidence than that. So Menendez is a notorious hawk and regularly demands Washington take aggressive policies towards countries such as Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba for human rights abuses and a lack of commitment to democracy. At the same time, Menendez could have, but failed to, block military aid and weapon sales to Egypt. Cairo is led by General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who swept to power in a 2014 military coup. As leader, he has imprisoned his political rivals, and the Egyptian forces have committed severe human rights abuses. And just to extend a little bit on that last paragraph before we move on here, I want to mention that it's not just that, he didn't block the weapon sales. He is alleged to have drafted letters that were passed to the Egyptian government. So when they applied for weapon sales from the U.S., they would be more likely to be accepted. So again, this is all pretty nefarious. All right, here, next up, that Menendez article was something I wrote for the Institute, as well as this one. U.S. to upgrade military ties with Kenya after Nairobi pledges troops to Haiti. So Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin announced that the U.S. would increase its military ties with Kenya. Washington agreed to provide additional security assistance to Kenya after Nairobi agreed to lead a UN mission into Haiti. Austin traveled to Kenya to ink the new defense cooperation agreement on Monday. He says signing the framework for defense cooperation between our two countries today reinforces the importance of our strategic partnership with Kenya and will help guide the bilateral defense relationship for the next 5 years. The Secretary of Defense thanked Nairobi for agreeing to send troops to Haiti at the event. According to the Defense Department readout, Austin noted that Kenya and the U.S. must work together to fight against al-Shabaab in Somalia. It's not exactly, I guess, clear what all the new cooperation is going to entail, but it seems like just a generic across-the-board increase of U.S. military support for Kenya. That's more weapons, more training, troops deployments, intelligence, and all those kinds of other training, maintenance, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure they're going to be engaging them more of. So the Kenyan defense minister, Representative Niobe, at the signing ceremony, he stated that an increase in complex and interconnected world, Our ability to work seamlessly together is paramount. This cooperation enables us to respond effectively to the ever-evolving challenges in our region. Last week, the U.S. hosted a conference in New York and rolled out a plan to provide $100 million to Nairobi in support of the Kenyan soldiers' deployment to Haiti. The U.S. hopes to get a resolution passed at the UN Security Council to authorize the mission. Kenyan says it plans to send at least 1,000 soldiers. UN peacekeepers and Kenyan soldiers have track records of committing human rights abuses, raising concerns that the U.S.-sponsored UN mission to Haiti will leave the Caribbean nation worse off than before. In August, 65 Haitian groups wrote a letter to the African Union calling on the body to block the Kenyan mission to Haiti. It said, none of the countries of the land of our ancestors, which they consider to be Africa, and I think, for Haiti, and I wonder, they make reference to this in the letter, and I wonder if this was maybe a consideration in Washington, is that, Haiti is a nation where they, threw off the slave owners there, and so they consider themselves in Haiti to be descendants of Africa, or at least most of the people there. And so that's kind of the context of this letter. So to go on, none of the countries of our land of our ancestors, which is Africa, must serve as a sounding board or armed of the former colonial slave-owning powers transferred into imperialist powers, and today are actively engaging in a criminal plot of the destabilization of Haiti, systematic sabotage of its sovereignty, of which the American UN occupation constitute a dangerous step. It is your duty to find the most effective strategy to explain to the leaders of this brother country that such a choice is unlikely to encourage to reinforce Haiti, the already unacceptable interference of imperialist powers, including the United States of America especially. Washington has sought a country to lead the deployment to Haiti for nearly a year. The White House attempted to pressure Canada into deploying its soldiers to Haiti, only to be rebuffed. In the letter, the Haitian organizations explained that the mission to Haiti will likely fail. As the Kenyan government asks itself why Canada and other countries in fact refuse, despite pressure or advantages offered, to engage in this dubious enterprise, it asks rhetorically. The Haitian Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, has repeatedly asked for a deployment. At times, Haitian people have protested the Prime Minister's request for international support. Henry only rose to power in Port-au-Prince with Washington's support, and that was after the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. And I don't break this down in this particular article, but if you've been keeping up with the series of articles I've written on Haiti in September, it's probably 4 or 5 now, I do mention most of those articles that while it's unclear of who assassinated Moïse, there's a trial going on in Miami where I'm not even sure if they got the right guy, but they're prosecuting some different people. There's been some Colombians arrested, but it's really unclear of who organized the plot against him, particularly who was interested in removing him from power in Haiti. But Ariel Henry has been named as a potential plotter, and it is substantiated with more than just, he was the guy who benefited from it. There's some phone calls and ties to people who are alleged to have been involved that Henry has. Additionally, last week, 2 Haitian organizations based in the U.S. called on the Joe Biden administration to drop support for Henry over the UN mission. The National Haitian American Elected Officials Network and the Family Action Network movement penned a letter on Friday. It said, any military intervention supporting Haiti's corrupt, repressive, unelected regime will likely exacerbate the current political crisis into a catastrophic one. It will further entrench this regime, deepening Haiti's political crisis while generating significant civilian casualties and migration pressure. The letter added, if your administration were to withdraw support for Dr. Henry, he would be forced to negotiate with Haitian civil society and other groups towards a peaceful solution of Haiti's current political crisis. And so, this is all a White House bungled, thing that's going on in Haiti, where if it wasn't for the support that they have for Ariel Henry, the situation in the country will likely be better than it is now, and it's only going to get worse with more support for Henry by sending UN troops to the country. Now, I guess one question I have that I really haven't addressed in any of my articles is, will this pass the UN Security Council? Maybe all this is just talk for nothing. Although with the U.S. signing the new defense cooperation agreement in Kenya, they must think that it's going to go through. Now, for anything to pass the UN Security Council, it has to have the approval of China and Russia. Now, as a Caribbean nation, if it was Nicaragua or something like that, China may have something to say about it. They do have interest in Latin America. They do have ties there. Some of that impacts, what countries recognize Taiwan as an independent country or not. So I'm not sure. My guess is that China is not going to veto it. The bigger question would be Russia, or I guess Russia or China, just doing it more out of spite and U.S. imperial control of the world than actually feeling like their interests are particularly threatened in Haiti. I don't think either country has any kind of real legacy there. Again, it's not Cuba, it's not Venezuela, it's not Nicaragua. So we will see, I guess, when this comes. But how the U.S. is pushing it, it doesn't seem to be the case. Now, I do wonder if the American officials spoke with their Russian counterparts about this and, have some kind of understanding that Russia isn't going to veto this. And if they do, then, that raises a whole other host of questions about what kind of talks are going on between U.S. and Russia. So, all right, next up here, getting into news on the war in Ukraine. Another article, this one I wrote on September 25th for the Institute. Budapest threatens to pull support from Kiev for Ukrainian ethnic laws oppressing Hungarians. So the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, said Budapest was ending its support for Kiev on international issues due to a 2017 law that limits the rights of Hungarians. The announcement comes as Ukraine's support in Eastern Europe wanes, with Poland announcing that all weapons transfers to Kiev after Poland announced it was halting all weapons transfers to Kiev after President of Ukraine Zelensky criticized Warsaw. So, speaking to the country's legislator on Monday, Orban took aim at a 2017 Ukrainian law that limits where the Hungarian language can be spoken. They want to transform Hungarian schools into Ukrainian schools, and if that does not work, they want to close them. We do not support Ukraine in any issue in the international space until it restores laws that guarantee the rights of Hungarians. Now, I kind of compare in the intro there that, this follows Poland. If you look at Poland and Hungary, they have been maybe on the exact opposite ends of the spectrum in the UN, or not in the UN, excuse me, in NATO and the European Union on how much support the bloc should give to Ukraine. And a part of, the resistance in Budapest has been that there are, I think, over 100,000, I think about 150,000 Hungarians that live in Ukraine. And since the 2014 coup in Ukraine, the nationalist government in Kiev has pushed forward ethnic laws. Now, those ethnic laws were really intended to eliminate the Russian culture in Ukraine. However, those laws have impacted other minority groups in Ukraine, including Poles and Hungarians. And so, let's say that in the United States, you signed a law saying that everybody has to speak English. And this law was really intended to impact Hispanics, who are, the probably the largest, Spanish is probably the largest language that's spoken in the country outside English, right? But it's also going to impact people who speak German and Mandarin and Ukrainian and French and Italian, right? Like, so just because the law wasn't really intended at Poland or Hungary, both Warsaw and Budapest have brought up these issues in the past and said like, hey, these laws are hurting, the ethnic Poles, the ethnic Hungarians that are living in Ukraine. And, Kiev really doesn't care about it. So, and then to get into, I guess, a little bit more here, again, Poland has been a huge supporter of Ukraine, demanding all countries send weapons. If you look at the modern battle tanks that have reached Ukraine, these are the Leopard 2, the Challenger 2, and the Abrams tanks that have just arrived. We'll get to more of that later. It was really Poland that drove Germany, the UK, and US to agree to send their modern battle tanks to Ukraine. Poland had the Leopard 2s. They put a lot of pressure on Berlin to lift a block and allow Poland to transfer the Leopard 2s that it owns to Ukraine. And that basically, opened the floodgates. And this has happened a couple times through the war where Poland has been the most aggressive supporter of Ukraine and has pushed the NATO alliance and the European alliance to take a more hardline stand. And so losing Poland's support is likely a bigger deal for Ukraine than losing Hungary's support. At the same time, the European Union, the NATO alliance, they're blots that require absolute consensus to do anything. And so Orban is saying that we're not going to do anything to help Ukraine at this point. Now, it's unclear what that means. Will they interfere and make it so that, they're like vetoing like inclusion of Ukrainian officials on new NATO councils? Are they blocking new European Union sanctions on Russia? That's unclear as how far Orban is going to take it, but I think there's a lot that Hungary could do to really make life difficult on Zelensky. So it's important to note here that Warsaw and Budapest made the decision after Zelensky accused Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia of supporting Russian President Vladimir Putin by implementing bans on Ukrainian grain. Throughout the war in Ukraine, Poland has been one of Kiev's most enthusiastic supporters in NATO and the European Union. Hungary, also a member of both blocs, has urged the blocs to take caution in escalating tensions with Russia too far. So I kind of already mentioned that breakdown. And I also mentioned here, Zelensky's recent international tour to Canada and the U.S. has not netted much support for Ukraine, as well as blundering with Warsaw support in Ottawa. Zelensky celebrated a World War II Nazi that fought with Germany in a second public relations nightmare. And so this has been almost amusing to see how all these people who denied the existence of Nazis in Ukraine for the first 18 months of the war are now saying that, there might be some Nazis around, but are they really like those kind of Nazis? And like trying to somehow obscure the fact that the US and Canada are supporting hardcore Nazis in Ukraine. All right. I think that's all I had to mention in this article. I also in Orban's speech, he said that Hungary was going to be in no rush to approve the Sweden membership into NATO. And I think, again, this is going to follow kind of how it worked with Finland, where Turkey is really taking the heat and trying to broker deals with the U.S. Turkey wants F-16s in order to allow Sweden into NATO. And my guess is that Hungary is basically going to wait until Turkey makes its decision. And then if Turkey decides that they're going to admit Sweden into NATO, Hungary will as well. If Turkey decides that they're not going to do it, then Hungary will not. It has to be an absolute consensus. One country standing apart, it is enough to block it. And so there's no reason, I think, from Hungary's position to be the country that's either blocking it or to over enthusiastically support NATO expansion. And that has, I think, kind of been Orban's policy here. All right, so on the last show, we talked about, Zelensky losing Poland's support, and I speculated that the U.S. was going to do one of two things. They were either going to punish or try to bribe Warsaw? And it looks like we have our answer here already. It's bribery. This is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. The Biden administration on Monday announced a $2 billion loan for Poland that will go towards modernizing Warsaw's military. Today, the United States is proud to announce the signing of a $2 billion foreign military financing, that's an FMF direct loan agreement to Poland's defense modernization, the State Department press release said. The State Department said the U.S. would provide $60 million in FMF funds to cover the cost of the loan. The press release described Warsaw as a stalwart U.S. ally, as Poland has become a major hub for arms shipments to Ukraine and spends more on its military than most European members. In addition to its central role in facilitating international assistance to neighboring Ukraine, Poland has demonstrated its ironclad commitment to strengthening regional security through robust investments in defense spending, the State Department said. Poland has been unloading its old Soviet-made equipment into Ukraine and purchasing lots of U.S. and other NATO military equipment, a policy that has been a boon for Western arms makers. The U.S. has also significantly expanded its military presence in Poland since Russia invaded Ukraine, with about 10,000 U.S. troops stationed there now. The loan announcement comes after Polish Prime Minister said Poland would no longer provide arms to Ukraine amid a public spat between Warsaw and Kiev over Ukrainian grain. The comments mark a significant shift in Poland, as it has been a staunch backer of the proxy war against Russia. And this spat has been going on for a while, and these countries basically feel like they need to enact the protectionist policies, or else their farmers are going to take a massive hit from Ukrainian grain being dumped into their nations. All right, Biden administration not pushing Ukraine to hold elections. So we got money for everything apparently, but funding elections in Ukraine isn't one of those things we could afford. A senior U.S. official told the Washington Post that the Biden administration is not pressuring Ukraine to hold elections, while some Western officials do want to see a wartime vote. This is what the unnamed official said to the Post. We're not pushing for them to have an election. The Post said the Biden administration was sympathetic to the logistical obstacles to holding a vote, which includes the fact that millions of Ukrainian refugees are in Europe. The administration's position runs counter to rhetoric about the war, which has framed it as a battle for democracy. Ukraine's constitution prohibits elections during martial law, but Ukrainian President Zelensky has expressed an openness to holding elections if the West foots the bill. Zelensky made the comments last month after receiving a visit from Senators Lindsey Graham, Richard Blumenthal, and Elizabeth Warren. According to the Post, the senators pressed Zelensky on holding elections, an idea initially floated by Tiny Knock, a Dutch politician serving as the head of Europe's Council Europe's Parliament Assembly. The Post report quoted a former Ukrainian Prime Minister, Yulia Tymoshenko, who said that Ukraine would lose the war if elections were held. The price of holding elections in wartime will be lost, she said. Unity is an indispensable resource for our victory. And look, I don't know. I mean, I get the idea of why elections in Ukraine are probably possible and could do something. At the same time, Zelensky has already banned his political opposition and nationalized the TV media. Further, we've seen the videos of Ukrainian military, police and other security enforcement officials going around to people and rounding up anyone who isn't sufficiently supportive enough of the war. And so I think even if you were to hold elections in Ukraine, they certainly would not be fair elections. At the same time, I guess maybe the concern is that if you do go ahead and hold elections and Zelensky doesn't win, or even a candidate that, advocates for peace is in Ukraine running around, well, one, he probably would be assassinated by the Ukrainian security forces, but two, showing cracks and fissures and how many Ukrainians really just want, another armored vehicle. They want another gun so that they could be sent to the front lines and fight the Russians. Maybe Ukrainians are tired of fighting and dying, and they really want their country to find some way to settle this diplomatically at this point rather than on the battlefield, because it sure doesn't seem like Ukraine's going to win and they're just going to keep throwing people into the meat grinder. All right. Interesting article here. U.S. taxpayer dollars are subsidizing small businesses in Ukraine. A report from 60 Minutes that aired Sunday details how U.S. taxpayer dollars are not only funding weapons in Ukraine, but also subsidizing small businesses and paying first responder salaries, among other things. While the bulk of U.S. support for Ukraine has gone towards military aid, the U.S. has also provided tens of billions of dollars in the form of assistance known as direct budgetary aid. According to USAID, budgetary aid keeps basic government services like hospitals, schools, and utilities running, and it sustains support for emergency first responders and firefighters. According to the 60 Minutes report, USAID pays for the salaries of all 57,000 Ukrainian first responders. A woman who runs a knitwear business in Ukraine spoke with 60 Minutes, and she says she receives subsidies from U.S. By taxpayers. We realize that we receive aid from the government, but it's the aid from the heart of every ordinary American person. And if you look at this, some of these shops being kept open are like luxury small businesses. And of course, this comes at a time when there's a lot of Americans at home who are struggling. I'm sure there's a lot of small businesses that could use a little subsidy here. But on top of that, we're talking about shutting down the American government, and, they're warning that a whole bunch of Americans are no longer going to have jobs and paychecks because of that. But at the same time, this aid to Ukraine is going to keep pumping and flowing. And so it's pretty clear that our elected leaders in Washington care a hell of a lot more about the Ukrainians than they do about us. All right, so more news on the budget debate here. Senate leaders on Tuesday announced they reached a deal on a stopgap funding bill that needs to be passed by September 30th to avert a potential government shutdown. The bill includes $6.2 billion for Ukraine and $6 billion for natural disasters. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said, "We will continue to fund the government at present levels while maintaining our commitment to Ukraine's security and humanitarian needs. We also need to ensure those impacted by national disasters across the country begin to get the resources they need." And as I said, I think this is all political theater. They basically cause a crisis saying that, oh my God, the government is going to shut down. All these people are going to lose jobs, paychecks, services. Everybody's life could crumble. Of course, then they say, oh, we could obviously during that shutdown keep arming and funding Ukraine, but not the American people who need paychecks and things like that. But in part, they do this so that they could pass these massive spending bills where nobody has time to read the bill and figure out where all the money is going anyways. But, on top of that, if you oppose, say, the $6 billion going to Ukraine and you say, I'm not going to vote for it for that reason, then every, news media outlet is going to be saying, well, Senator so-and-so is making sure that White House tour guys no longer have a job and they're going to get furloughed and not get a paycheck. And they just want that poor lady, that poor nice lady to suffer. And in reality, you're trying to actually govern, which means debating where billions of dollars go. And, all these things should be passed separately, but they like piling it all into one massive bill that nobody understands or reads, so they can make sure that all of their corrupt funds continue going to all the people who fund their campaigns and who they are indebted to. All right, so on the last show, we discussed an article by Connor Freeman where there was an attack on some Russian military facilities in Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula. This was portrayed particularly by Kiev as a very significant blow to the Russian defense, naval fleet there, and it doesn't seem like it's quite as big of a win as the Ukrainians thought. So this from Dave DeCamp today at antiwar.com. Russian Black Sea Fleet commander attends meeting after Ukraine claims he was killed. The commander of Russia's Black Sea Fleet attended a Russian Defense Ministry video conference on Tuesday, a day after Ukraine claims he was killed in a September 22nd missile strike on the fleet's headquarters in Sevastopol. The Russian Defense Ministry released footage showing Admiral Viktor Sokolov virtually appearing in a meeting led by the Russian defense minister. In response to Sokolov's appearance at the meeting, Ukraine's special minister forces claimed that he was dead on Monday, so he would clarify information about the missile strike. I guess it's possible that Russia is like reusing some old video or something like that, but it seems almost more likely to me it's the Ukrainians lying here. All right, so first up on the battlefield in Ukraine, first batch of U.S.-made Abrams tanks arrive in Ukraine. This was confirmed by Zelensky on Monday, and as Dave DeCamp mentions in his article here, they will be armed with the toxic depleted uranium ammunition. This is known to have serious health and environmental consequences, and Russia has warned that they are going to treat these weapons as if they are dirty bombs. Now, we also have Russia saying that U.S. Abrams tanks in Kremlin, saying that the U.S. Abrams tanks in Ukraine will burn. So on Tuesday, the Kremlin said that U.S. provided Abrams tanks to Ukraine will not impact Russian operations and will burn like other Western armored vehicles. This is from the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov. There is no panacea, no single weapon that could change the balance of power on the battlefield. They too will burn. Peskov's comments came the day after Zelensky and U.S. officials said the first batch of Abrams tanks arrived in Ukraine. The tanks are armed with toxic depleted uranium ammunition, which is linked to cancer and birth defects. According to the Wall Street Journal, Ukrainian officials have acknowledged that the Abrams tanks are unlikely to significantly alter the shape of the war, with Ukraine's fall rains approaching. Muddy conditions will make it difficult for the tanks to operate. And I brought this up. This seems to be a very odd time to bring the tanks into Ukraine. Again, maybe they could get the Ukrainians to push for a couple weeks here, but pretty soon it's going to be much harder for armor and heavy vehicles to operate in Ukraine. All right, couple stories here before we wrap up on the region around Ukraine. 4 American advanced fighter jets arrived in Romania and will begin conducting patrols over the Black Sea. This is an article I wrote for antiwar.com. The deployment comes as Washington's proxy war against Moscow in Ukraine has stretched into the Black Sea region. Acting NATO spokesperson Dylan White announced the arrival of F-16s on Friday. I welcome the United States' deployment of an additional F-16 fighter jets to the NATO air policing mission in Romania. This sends a clear message that we will protect every ally. As Russia continues its brutal war of aggression in Ukraine, we have seen a number of strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure very close to NATO territory. We remain vigilant and in close contact with allies in the region. Last week, Romania extended a no-fly zone along its eastern border. Bucharest said that the restriction extends 20 to 30 kilometers inside Romanian territory. As the fighting in Ukraine has expanded into the country's west, debris from battles have landed in Romanian territory. The war in Ukraine regularly spills into the Black Sea. In the past week, Ukraine has launched multiple strikes on Sevastopol, a Russian port on the body of water. The port is home to Moscow's most critical naval base. And, these planes, the F-16s are fighter jets. They're meant for combat. They also have a lot of surveillance and advanced radar and equipment and stuff on them like that. And so I do wonder if, increasing patrols in this region is going to increase the amount of intelligence that the U.S. has to provide Ukraine and how Russia is going to react to that. So additionally, this could prove to be like a hotspot for Russia and the U.S. American and Russian aircrafts have already clashed over the Black Sea since the start of the war. In March, a U.S. Reaper drone flying out of a base in Romania crashed after a Russian Su-27 dumped fuel on it. So again, this is a manned aircraft, so something like that would be far more significant. We will see how that plays out. And last up here, Erdogan says Turkish approval of Sweden's NATO bid hinges on a sale of F-16s. So the Turkish president, that's Erdogan, said Tuesday that Turkish Parliament will ratify Sweden's NATO membership as long as the U.S. follows through on its plans to sell F-16s to Turkey. Erdogan told NATO in July that Turkey's parliament would approve Sweden's membership when it reconvenes this fall, but there is yet to be a vote. The F-16 deal that Turkey is seeking is expected to be worth $20 billion, and the Biden administration has indicated it will go through with it if Ankara ratifies Sweden's NATO bid. Erdogan said, "I hope that so long as they maintain true to their promise, our parliament will also remain loyal to the promise that was made." While the Biden administration supports the F-16 deal for Turkey, there has been oppositions from Congress. The deal's main opponents have been Senator Robert Menendez, who was just stripped of his influential position as head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee after the Department of Justice indicted him for corruption over allegations that he accepted bribes to benefit Egypt. Erdogan said Menendez stepping down provided an opportunity for Turkey, and we'll see what happens here. My guess, again, is that Sweden does end up becoming a NATO member, and that once Turkey is moving forward in its parliament with allowing Sweden to become a member, Hungary will follow suit and make that approval as well. Anyways, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today. I will be back with more episodes later in the week.